I slid into my husband's car and noticed a small tube tucked in the glove compartment, personal lubricant. My heart didn't skip a beat. I didn't shout, cry, or ask questions. I simply took it out and replaced it with industrial-grade superglue. What happened after that would have the neighbors calling 911 and firefighters bursting through our front door. If you're watching this, thank you for being here. Please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love seeing how far these stories of heartbreak and strength travel. That morning, I sat alone at our kitchen table. The silence in the house was thick, the kind that presses against your chest until breathing feels like work. The old clock on the wall, a wedding gift from my late mother, ticked in that steady, accusing rhythm. Every sound of it reminded me of something I was beginning to suspect, that my beautiful life might just be a carefully painted lie. My husband, Charles, had come home late again from one of his endless business dinners. He didn't look just tired, he looked burdened, haunted, like a man trying to smother a secret. His face showed it, those new lines around his eyes, the heaviness around his mouth. He tossed his jacket on the couch, loosened his tie like it was choking him, and sank into bed without saying goodnight. The scent of his cologne, that crisp cedarwood blend I used to love, lingered, but beneath it was something foreign, a faint floral sweetness, perfume, not mine. The air in the room suddenly felt too heavy to breathe. A few minutes later, his snoring filled the space once, a comforting sound, now a cruel lullaby for a woman fooling herself. I got up quietly, the way you do after decades of marriage, when every floorboard and hinge knows your step. I picked up the little mess he'd left behind: his jacket, wallet, phone, and that old laptop. His phone screen was still lit. A new email glowed there, like an omen. Charles never used email. Too complicated, he'd always said. I'd rather just call. But this message was right there, plain as day. Out of a mix of dread and curiosity, I opened it. It was just one line short, sharp, and devastating. You were amazing tonight, Dad. The world went still. Dad. The word echoed in my head, taunting me. Who would call him that, and with that kind of intimacy? My thumb trembled as I scrolled for more, but the message stood alone. The sender's address was a jumble of meaningless letters, offering no clues, no answers. Just an icy sense that something was terribly, irreversibly wrong. I looked toward the bedroom. Charles turned over, his face calm in the dim light, peaceful, while my heart was in freefall. I put his phone back exactly where I'd found it, and took a long, shaking breath. I kept cleaning, trying to hold myself together through motion. When I reached into his pants pocket, my hand brushed a folded receipt, crisp and new. It was from a high-end steakhouse in San Antonio, dated just hours ago. San Antonio. He'd told me he was in Dallas. A hollow laugh escaped before I could stop it. Charles hated driving to Dallas, always said the traffic was unbearable. But San Antonio? That city held nostalgia for him. His mother had lived there before she passed, and he used to tell me stories of summer visits filled with warmth and family. But this dinner was for two. The receipt listed a bottle of expensive Cabernet Sauvignon, the same wine he'd bought me for our 10th anniversary, a night I still remembered vividly. Back then, the candlelight had flickered across his proud smile as he toasted to my first bakery success. That memory now felt poisoned, like a photo curling in the heat of betrayal. I took out my phone and quietly snapped pictures of both the email and the receipt. 40 years of marriage had taught me to trust my instincts, and mine were screaming. My hands trembled not from shock anymore, but from something darker, the sense that the ground beneath my life was about to crumble. I went to the garage. His old SUV was still warm. The air smelled faintly of gasoline and that same foreign perfume. I turned on my phone's flashlight and started searching. At first, nothing, just spare change, a crumpled napkin, a water bottle. Then my hand brushed against something slick and plastic inside the glove box. I pulled it out and froze. A half-used tube of lubricant, residue dried around the cap. It felt heavy in my hand, heavier than steel. I stood there under the dim light, staring at it, realizing what it meant. Charles and I hadn't been intimate in years. He always blamed exhaustion, age, low testosterone, whatever excuse fit the day. So what, or rather, who was this for? I set it back exactly as I'd found it, wiping my hands so hard they stung. I kept searching, methodically now, like a woman cataloging the ruins of her life. Under the back seat, I found crumpled napkins, faintly scented with that same sweet, Unfamiliar perfume, bold and invasive. I took photos of everything, the napkins, the tube, the proof. Then I closed the car door and stood in the quiet garage, the truth pressing down on me. Back inside, I sat at the kitchen table, his phone still glowing faintly beside me. I checked his messages, sterile business chats, nothing personal. His inbox was spotless, too spotless. The drafts folder empty. Deleted items wiped clean. A master at deception. Rage rose in me, not fiery but cold, steady, like a storm gathering far out at sea. I wasn't just angry, I was awake. The next morning, sunlight crept through the curtains, soft and golden, but it couldn't reach the chill inside me. I'd barely slept. I cooked breakfast out of habit, eggs, toast, black coffee, and waited. Charles came downstairs looking drained, unshaven, and still smelling faintly of that damn perfume. He mumbled, "Big meeting today, don't wait up." I smiled, the kind of brittle smile women perfect after decades of disappointment. "Of course," I said gently. "Drive safe." When the door closed, I exhaled. The house was mine again. But so was the truth, and I was done being blind to it. I washed the breakfast dishes one by one, the clinking of porcelain, a small rhythm that kept me steady. The truth was now like a splinter under my skin, small, sharp, and impossible to ignore. I couldn't live another day wondering, doubting. I needed proof, something undeniable. I dried my hands and reached for my phone. There was one person I could call, though I never imagined I would. Her name was Mrs. Miller, a friend from the early days of my bakery. She had once mentioned a private investigator she trusted. "Evelyn," she had said years ago, "if you ever find yourself doubting someone, call Thomas. He's quiet, professional, and never judges." Back then, I had laughed it off. But now, with my world slipping through my fingers, I found her number and dialed. My voice trembled with every ring. "Mrs. Miller, I need to speak to that investigator you told me about," I whispered. She paused, and I could hear the concern in her silence before she finally replied, "Oh, Evelyn, has Charles done something?" I couldn't bring myself to answer. "I just need the truth," I said softly. "Can you help me?" Within the hour, she sent me his number. The text came with a simple note, "He's discreet, trust him." I messaged him immediately. "Mr. Thomas, I was given your contact by Mrs. Miller. I think my husband might be unfaithful." His reply was quick, efficient, but kind. "Mrs. Roberts, I understand. Let's meet at noon at the Greenleaf Cafe downtown. We'll talk there." At noon, I sat in the corner of that small cafe, surrounded by the smell of roasted coffee and soft jazz humming from the radio. The sunlight through the window fell across the table like a spotlight on my fear. Thomas arrived right on time, a man in his 50s, stocky, with intelligent eyes that seemed to read more than what was spoken. I handed him a flash drive containing the photos I'd taken, the email, the receipt, the lubricant, the perfume-stained napkins. "This is all I have," I told him. "I just need to know what's real." He nodded calmly, scrolling through each image on his tablet, his face unreadable. Then he closed it, set it aside, and said, "I'll start following him today. You'll hear from me as soon as I have something solid." "Thank you," I whispered. My voice cracked on the last word. I left the cafe feeling hollow. 40 years of marriage, and now I had hired a stranger to follow my husband. The irony cut deep. I used to think Charles was my rock, my partner through every storm. Now I realized he was the storm itself. That night, I stayed late at the bakery. The scent of yeast and vanilla was normally comforting, but now it felt like a memory of someone else's life. I was checking invoices when my phone buzzed. It was Thomas. I opened the message, and my stomach turned. It was a photo Charles at a restaurant, wearing his favorite blue shirt, sitting across from a woman. Their hands were touching. I zoomed in. My blood ran cold. The woman was Allison, my daughter-in-law. She wore a tight black dress, her makeup heavy, her hair cascading in waves. They didn't look like family. They looked like lovers. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. My hand trembled as I scrolled through more photos. In one, they sat in a private corner, candlelight flickering between them. Allison was smiling, leaning close. Charles was raising his glass, looking at her with tenderness, a kind of softness I hadn't seen from him in decades. My heart cracked open in silence. In that moment, I wasn't just betrayed, I was erased. Later that night, Thomas sent a short video. I sat in the dark bakery office and pressed play. Allison whispered something in Charles's ear, and he laughed a deep, warm laugh I hadn't heard in years. Then they stood, hand in hand, and walked to his car. Charles opened the door for her, still playing the gentleman. I replayed it over and over, like someone poking at a bruise just to feel the pain again. Allison, my daughter-in-law, the woman I had welcomed into my home, taught family recipes to, hugged as my own, and Charles, the man I had built a life with, together, destroying everything sacred. I backed up all the files Thomas sent. Photos, videos, timestamps, each one proof of something I didn't want to believe. By dawn, I was still awake. The house was quiet, but my mind was screaming. The next morning, as I prepared deliveries at the bakery, Thomas messaged again. "More evidence, Mrs. Roberts." I opened the new photos, Charles and Allison leaving a law office together, then standing outside a 4-star hotel, laughing, too close for family. In one video, they were on a hotel balcony. He had his arm around her waist. She leaned on his shoulder. Then, they kissed. A short kiss, but enough to kill what little hope I had left. I saved everything. Every photo, every clip. The way his hand brushed her hair the same way he used to touch mine when we were young. The betrayal burned through me like acid. I remembered our family dinners. Daniel, our son, always joking, "Mom, I swear Allison doesn't like Dad. She avoids him like the plague." I had believed it. We all had. Now I knew better. Their distance at home was just another layer of their deceit. I sat at my kitchen table that night, staring at old family photos. There we were, Charles with his arm around me, Allison smiling beside Daniel. A perfect family portrait, alive framed in wood and glass. My fingers tightened around the picture until the frame cracked. That was the moment I decided. I wasn't going to cry anymore. I was going to fight. The next few days passed in a blur of silence. I went through the motions of living baking, opening the shop, smiling at customers, but inside, something in me had gone cold. Each morning, I watched Charles leave the house in his pressed shirts and polished shoes, humming the same tune he used to when we were young. And every time that door closed behind him, I felt the same rush of bitterness. The image of him with Allison burned into my mind like a scar. Thomas kept sending updates. He was thorough, almost painfully so. Photos, short clips, timestamps, each one another stab of truth. They met at a small motel on the edge of town. They had dinner together at a bistro where Charles once took me for my birthday. Every detail felt like a ghost mocking the life I'd built. On the third day, Thomas called instead of texting. "Mrs. Roberts," he said quietly, "you should see this for yourself. I'll send the location." I didn't hesitate. I drove there, a quiet park on the outskirts of San Antonio, where the oak trees arched over the walking trail like guardians of secrets. When I pulled up, I saw them before I even got out of the car. Charles and Allison, sitting on a bench, eating ice cream like teenagers. She was laughing, tossing her hair back. He reached out and wiped a bit of ice cream from her lip, his thumb lingering too long. My stomach turned. I wanted to storm over, scream, throw the truth in their faces. But instead, I stayed in the car, my fingers gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. They stood up and began walking toward the parking lot. I slouched down, hiding behind the rearview mirror as they passed just a few feet away. Allison's voice carried through the open window. "I told Daniel I was helping you pick out a gift for your retirement." Charles chuckled. "Smart girl. You're better at lying than I am." I could hardly breathe. My son, my sweet Daniel, had no idea. He thought his wife was out shopping, doing errands. He didn't know she was walking hand in hand with his father. They drove off in Charles's car. I sat there long after they were gone, the wind rustling through the trees, the scent of wildflowers in the air, everything so calm, so beautiful, while my world was shattering. When I finally returned home, I went straight to the garage. The same glove compartment, the same tube of lubricant, still sitting there, a symbol of everything broken between us. And that was when the idea came to me. Not out of rage, but out of something colder. Justice, maybe. I went inside, opened the utility drawer, and found the tube of industrial superglue I used for broken ceramics in the bakery. My hands didn't shake. I opened Charles's car door, unscrewed the cap, and carefully swapped the contents, sealing the lie with a touch of irony. Then I waited. The next evening, Charles came home humming again. He kissed my cheek, the same cheek he'd kissed for 40 years. I smiled back, pretending, the way women of my generation were taught to. He said he was meeting an old colleague for drinks. I just nodded, set his dinner plate down, and told him to have fun. When his car disappeared down the street, I poured myself a glass of wine and waited by the window. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed a text from Thomas. Something's happened. He's at the ER. For a moment, I couldn't move. I didn't know what to feel: fear, satisfaction, or disbelief. I grabbed my purse and keys and drove to the hospital. When I arrived, flashing red lights bathed the parking lot. Firefighters, EMTs, chaos. I saw Charles's SUV surrounded by people. I recognized the paramedic's voice. She sounded young, maybe in her 20s. "He's glued. I mean literally glued," she shouted, trying to suppress a laugh. And there he was, Charles standing half inside the car, his face a mix of agony and humiliation. Allison was beside him, wrapped in a blanket, crying and yelling at the medics. The firefighters were trying hard not to laugh as they used solvents and cutters to separate them. I stood at a distance, clutching my purse, pretending to be just another bystander. No one recognized me. The absurdity of it all. The man who'd betrayed me, caught in the most ridiculous trap imaginable, almost made me laugh out loud. The next morning, the story was everywhere. Local couple found stuck in car, emergency crews called. The news never mentioned names, but our neighbors didn't need to read them to know. In a small community, gossip travels faster than truth. Charles came home 2 days later, walking stiffly, humiliated beyond words. He tried to speak, but I just looked at him calm, quiet. "I know everything," I said simply. He sat down, his face pale, his lips trembling. For the first time in years, he had nothing to say. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I poured him a cup of coffee and placed it in front of him. "You'll tell Daniel," I said. "You'll tell him what you've done, not me." He nodded slowly, defeated. That night, I went upstairs, lay in our bed, and for the first time in months, I slept peacefully. The morning after everything came crashing down, the house felt different. Still and hollow, like the air after a storm calm, but with debris everywhere. Charles had slept on the couch. I could hear him moving downstairs, slow and heavy, like a man twice his age. I poured myself a cup of coffee, black and bitter, and sat at the table. I didn't speak. Neither did he. The silence between us was a canyon. When he finally did, his voice was hoarse. "Evelyn, I made a mistake." I almost laughed. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary, Charles, not sleeping with your daughter-in-law." He flinched, his eyes darting away. "It wasn't supposed to happen. She was lonely. Daniel works too much, and she—" "Don't you dare." I cut him off. "Don't you dare try to make her loneliness an excuse for your betrayal. You were supposed to be her father-in-law, not her comfort." He rubbed his temples, the weight of it pressing down on him. I don't know what to say. I looked at him, and for the first time in years, I didn't see my husband. I saw a man weak, selfish, ordinary. Not the partner I'd built my life around, not the father who'd once made our son laugh until he cried. Just a stranger wearing the face of someone I used to love. "Then don't say anything," I told him quietly. "You'll speak to Daniel. You'll tell him the truth. Every word. He deserves that much." Charles nodded, eyes glistening. "He'll never forgive me." "Neither will I," I said. That afternoon, I left the house. I needed air, space, distance, something to remind me that the world was still bigger than this heartbreak. I drove to the ocean, to the same stretch of coastline we used to visit when Daniel was little. The water was calm, blue-gray, endless. The sound of the waves pulled me back to myself. I sat on a bench overlooking the shore, watching gulls dance with the wind. I thought about all the years I'd spent being the good wife, patient, forgiving, quiet, the woman who kept the house clean, the meals warm, and the peace unbroken. I had believed that was love, but now I understood it was survival. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel. "Mom, Dad's here. He wants to talk. Should I come to you afterward?" My hands trembled as I typed back. "Yes, sweetheart. Come home after. I'll be waiting." Hours later, I heard the front door open. Daniel stepped in, his face pale, his eyes raw. He didn't need to say anything, I could tell. He knew everything. He sat down across from me, silent for a long moment. Then, softly, "Mom, how could they?" I reached for his hand. "Because people forget who they are when they chase what they want. But that's their shame, not yours." He squeezed my hand, his jaw tight. "I don't know what to do." "You don't have to do anything right now," I said. "Just breathe, let it hurt, then let it pass." Tears welled in his eyes. "I can't even look at her, Mom." "I know," I whispered, "but you will one day, and when you do, it won't burn the same way. That's how healing works. Slow, cruel, but steady." He stayed the night, sleeping in his old room, the same one he left behind when he went to college, walls still lined with his teenage posters. I stood in the hallway for a long time, listening to his breathing. My boy, my heart. And I silently promised him, I will not let this destroy us. The next morning, Charles was gone. No note, no goodbye, just gone. His closet half empty, his toothbrush missing. After 40 years, he left like a man sneaking out of a motel room. I didn't cry. I just stood in that quiet kitchen, sunlight spilling through the curtains, and felt the strangest thing: peace. Later that week, Daniel filed for divorce on Allison's behalf. He didn't even want to see her. I didn't ask what she said or if she cried. Some truths don't need repeating. I focused on the bakery. Customers came and went, unaware that behind the smiles and pastries was a woman who had burned and rebuilt herself. My regulars noticed something different though, the calm in my voice, the way I laughed a little easier. One afternoon, an older woman came in silver hair, bright scarf, kind eyes. She leaned over the counter and said, "You seem lighter, dear, like you finally let go of something heavy." I smiled. Maybe I did. When I closed the shop that night, I walked to my car and glanced at the sky. The moon hung low and golden, soft as a promise. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel lonely. I felt free. Spring came early that year. The air in San Antonio carried the soft scent of orange blossoms, and the streets seemed brighter somehow. Maybe it was the sunlight, or maybe it was me finally opening my eyes after so many years of living half asleep. It had been 3 months since Charles left. The first few weeks were strange. I kept expecting to hear his keys in the door, his shoes by the mat, his cough echoing through the hallway. But as days turned into weeks, those sounds faded from my memory. The silence, once unbearable, began to feel like company. I spent most of my time at the bakery. I started experimenting with new recipes: lavender scones, honey butter biscuits, cinnamon rolls with cardamom glaze. My hands, once shaking from anger, now found calm in the rhythm of kneading dough and measuring sugar. There was something healing in creation. Every loaf I pulled from the oven felt like proof that life could still rise, no matter how deflated it had been. One afternoon, a young woman came into the bakery, maybe in her late 20s, with a kind smile and tear-streaked cheeks. She ordered a slice of lemon pie, but didn't touch it. She just stared at her hands. "You all right, honey?" I asked gently. She shook her head, whispering, "My husband left last night, said he wasn't happy anymore." I sat across from her, wiping my hands on my apron. "I know that kind of pain," I said quietly. "It feels endless right now, but I promise it isn't." She looked up, surprised. "How do you know?" "Because I've been where you are," I said, "and I'm still here." We talked for nearly an hour. She left with a warm scone and a little bit of hope. When the door closed behind her, I realized something. Pain, when shared, becomes softer. It loses its teeth. Later that week, Daniel came by. He looked tired, but steadier. He hugged me tightly and said, "Mom, I filed the papers. It's over." I nodded, brushing his hair like I used to when he was a boy. "You did what you had to do." He sighed. "I've been thinking about selling the house. Too many memories." "Then sell it," I said simply. "Memories live in you, not in walls." He smiled, a sad but genuine one. "You sound stronger." "Maybe I am," I said. "Turns out, when you lose everything you thought you needed, you finally figure out what you're made of." He stayed for dinner: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, the kind of meal that fills the house with comfort. We talked for hours, not about the past, but about the future. When he left, he kissed my forehead and said, "You're amazing, Mom." And for the first time in a long time, I believed him. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the rain fall softly against the glass. I thought about Charles, where he might be, whether he missed the smell of home, the sound of the clock ticking in the kitchen. I didn't feel anger anymore, just a quiet sadness and a strange kind of gratitude. He had broken me open, and somehow, through the cracks, the light had found its way in. One Sunday morning, I joined a local book club for women over 50. They met at a small coffee shop downtown. I almost didn't go, worried I wouldn't fit in. But the moment I sat down, surrounded by laughter and stories, I felt something shift. These women weren't defined by who they'd been married to or what they'd lost. They were alive, messy, funny, strong. There was Margaret, who had left a 25-year marriage and now painted for a living. Nora, who had survived breast cancer and took up yoga at 65. And June, who'd buried 2 husbands and still managed to flirt with the waiter. I laughed harder that morning than I had in years. After the meeting, as we walked to our cars, Margaret slipped her arm through mine and said, "You know, Evelyn, you have this light about you, like a woman who's finally stopped apologizing for taking up space." I smiled. "Maybe I just learned that surviving isn't enough. You've got to live again." She grinned. "Then come with us next weekend. We're going to Austin for a women's retreat, good food, good wine, and no men allowed." I almost said no. But something inside me, that quiet, brave voice I hadn't listened to in years, said yes. That weekend changed everything. We hiked through wildflower trails, sang around campfires, and shared stories under starlit skies. When I told mine, the group went silent. Then June raised her glass and said, "To Evelyn, proof that sometimes the ending is just the start of something honest." I felt my throat tighten. It wasn't pity in their eyes, it was recognition. Every woman there had been broken in some way. Every one of them had rebuilt herself from the ashes. When I came home from that trip, the house no longer felt empty. It felt mine. I hung new curtains, painted the kitchen pale yellow, replaced the old wedding photo with one of me standing on the beach, wind in my hair, smiling for real. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I wrote a letter not to Charles, not to Allison, but to myself. "Dear Evelyn, you did it. You survived what was meant to destroy you. You loved deeply, lost deeply, and still found your way back to joy. Don't ever forget that you are your own rescue. Love yourself the way you once tried to love everyone else." I folded the letter and tucked it into my journal. Then I looked out the window at the fading light, and for the first time, I didn't see endings. I saw beginnings. The next morning, when I opened the bakery, I changed the sign on the door. It used to say Robert's Family Bakery. Now it simply read, Evelyn's. A name reborn, a woman renewed. And when the first customer of the day came in, I greeted her with the same warmth I'd once reserved for the people I loved most. "Good morning," I said, smiling. "Welcome to Evelyn's." And I meant every word. Summer arrived with the kind of heat that made the pavement shimmer and the air smell faintly of magnolia and baked asphalt. Business at the bakery was good, better than it had been in years. Tourists stopped by for pie, neighbors lingered for coffee, and some mornings I even caught myself humming as I kneaded the dough. I'd started keeping a journal behind the counter. Between customers, I'd jot down thoughts, little reminders of how far I'd come. Forgive, but don't invite back. Love yourself first. Never hand someone the scissors to cut your wings. It wasn't poetry, just pieces of truth I had learned the hard way. One morning, as I was opening up, a man came in before I'd even flipped the open sign. He looked about my age, late 60s, maybe with sun-browned skin, salt and pepper hair, and kind eyes that seemed to smile even before his mouth did. He wore a faded denim shirt and held a leather-bound notebook. "Sorry, ma'am," he said, adjusting his hat. "Didn't mean to barge in early. I saw the lights on and thought you might have coffee ready." I smiled. "For early risers like you? Always." He chuckled, setting his hat on the counter. "Name's Jack. I'm new in town. Bought the old house 2 blocks down, the one with the blue shutters." "Oh, that place. It's beautiful. Needs some love, though." "That's what I hear," he said, smiling. "Guess we've got that in common." There was something about him, not romance, not yet, but ease. The kind that comes from someone who's lived enough life to stop pretending. Over the next few weeks, Jack became a regular. Always the same order: black coffee and a slice of pecan pie. He'd sit by the window with his notebook, sometimes sketching, sometimes writing. We started talking about the neighborhood, about books, about music from our younger years. He told me he used to be a high school art teacher before retiring. "Kids kept me young," he said, "until they didn't." I laughed. "I taught patience, you taught chaos," he grinned. "Maybe that's why we both ended up here trying to make sense of the mess." One afternoon, he asked if I'd like to take a walk by the river after closing. I hesitated at first. It had been decades since I'd gone anywhere that wasn't planned around someone else's needs. But that voice inside me, the one that had helped me rebuild, whispered, "Say yes." The sun was setting when we walked along the river trail. The sky burned orange and gold, and the cicadas hummed like a choir in the trees. Jack told me about his late wife, Mary, who'd passed from cancer 5 years earlier. The way he spoke, not bitter, just tender, made me ache with a quiet understanding. "I thought I'd be angry forever," he said. "But grief doesn't leave you, it just changes shape. Some days it feels like a stone, some days like a feather." I nodded. I used to think I'd never stop hurting either, but then, one morning, I woke up and realized I'd stopped waiting for him to come home. He looked at me for a long moment. "You're stronger than you think." I smiled softly. "I think that's true for both of us." We sat on a bench overlooking the water, two strangers bound by different losses and the same kind of healing. When he walked me back to my car, he didn't ask for my number, didn't rush, just tipped his hat and said, "See you tomorrow, Miss Evelyn." And he did. Days turned into weeks. Jack's visits became part of my mornings. The laughter, the easy conversation, the quiet understanding of two people who'd lived long enough to know that love isn't always fireworks. Sometimes it's just peace. One Friday evening, I closed early. I was sitting outside the bakery, sipping tea, when Daniel pulled up. He looked happier, lighter, somehow. "Guess what?" he said. "I got a promotion, and I met someone." I stood, smiling. "Oh? Tell me." "She's kind, Mom. Steady. Nothing like." He trailed off, then exhaled. "You know." I touched his arm. "That's good, sweetheart. You deserve something calm after everything." He looked at me with that same boyish grin he used to have when he brought home good grades. "You look happy too, Mom. I see it in your face." I laughed softly. Maybe I am. Maybe happiness looks different now. He hugged me tight before leaving, and as I watched him drive away, I realized something beautiful. The cycle had broken. The pain hadn't passed down. I had stopped it. Later that week, Jack invited me to his place. He'd been fixing it up little by little, painting, planting roses in the front yard. He showed me his art studio, walls filled with sketches and watercolor landscapes. One canvas stood out, a painting of the bakery, golden light pouring from its windows, a woman standing inside with her hand on the counter. "Is that supposed to be me?" I asked, smiling. He nodded. "You looked peaceful that day. I wanted to capture it." My throat tightened. "That's beautiful, Jack." "Not as beautiful as the real thing," he said gently. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Sometimes silence says everything. When I drove home that night, I rolled down the windows. The air was warm, soft, filled with the hum of summer. I felt alive, not because of a man, not because of forgiveness, but because I'd finally chosen myself. That night, I wrote one more line in my journal before going to bed. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without bleeding. I closed the book, turned off the light, and smiled in the dark. The story of my life had changed, not because someone saved me, but because I saved myself. And that, I realized, was the most powerful love story of all. Autumn drifted in softly, painting the streets of San Antonio in shades of amber and gold. The days grew shorter, and the mornings carried that crisp promise that always made me nostalgic, the kind of air that smells faintly of cinnamon and new beginnings. Business at Evelyn's was thriving. Every morning, a line formed before I even unlocked the door. Locals called it the little bakery with the big heart. I liked that. It felt right. Jack still came by most mornings. Sometimes he'd bring me fresh flowers from the farmer's market, sunflowers, my favorite, and sometimes just a quiet smile. We'd sit by the window as the world hurried past, sipping coffee, talking about everything and nothing. It wasn't love in the way I'd known it before, not the kind that consumed or demanded. It was gentler, rooted in understanding, like two trees growing side by side, their branches brushing when the wind blew just right. One morning, as I wiped down the counter, Jack said, "You know, I never thought I'd meet someone who made me want to stay in one place again." I looked up, amused, "And here I thought you were just here for the pie." He laughed, that low, warm laugh I'd grown fond of. "Maybe both," I smiled, shaking my head. "Careful, Jack, I'm not the settling type anymore." "Neither am I," he said. "But maybe that's what makes it work. Two people who aren't trying to own each other, just choosing to walk beside one another." His words stayed with me long after he left that morning. Once, I'd believed love meant belonging to someone. Now, I knew better. It meant belonging to yourself first, and then sharing that peace with someone who understood it. That weekend, Daniel invited me to dinner at his new place. His home was simple and cozy, filled with laughter. His new partner, Maria, was warm and soft-spoken, the kind of woman who listened with her eyes as much as her ears. When she hugged me goodbye, she said quietly, "He's healing, you know. You gave him that." I blinked back tears. "No, sweetheart. He gave that to himself." Driving home that night, I thought about how much had changed. A year ago, my life had fallen apart. Now, piece by piece, it had rebuilt itself into something stronger, not perfect, but honest. A few weeks later, Jack invited me to the town's fall festival. The air was cool, the sky painted pink and lavender as the sun set behind the fairgrounds. We walked hand in hand through the stalls, the smell of kettle corn and apple cider drifting around us. At one booth, an elderly couple danced to a slow country tune. The man twirled his wife, her silver hair catching the light. She laughed that carefree laugh only people who have lived through storms can give. Jack leaned close and whispered, "I'd dance with you if my knees weren't so stubborn." I chuckled. "Oh, I'm sure we'd make quite the spectacle." He grinned. "Then maybe next time." I nodded. Next time. It wasn't a promise, just a gentle hope. When he drove me home, we sat in the car for a while, neither of us wanting to break the quiet. He finally said, "Evelyn, you've got this strength about you. Not loud, not showy, the kind that makes people feel safe, just being near you." I swallowed, touched. "You make it sound poetic." He smiled. "It's the truth." He didn't kiss me. He just took my hand and held it steady, kind, sure. That was enough. That night, I stood by the window again, watching the streetlights flicker. The bakery sign glowed faintly in the distance, Evelyn's. My name, my story. I thought of all the women who had come into my bakery over the past months, each carrying their own heartbreaks, their own second chances. Somehow, without planning it, Evelyn's had become a haven for them, a place where women could laugh again, talk freely, and heal together. One evening, a customer named Ruth told me, "You should write a book, you know. Call it The Bakery of Second Chances." I laughed, but that night I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and began to write. Not for fame, not for money, just to remember. To honor the journey of every woman who ever thought her story ended when love broke her heart. Page after page, I wrote about betrayal, forgiveness, friendship, rediscovery, and the quiet, steady joy that comes from finally learning to love yourself. When I finished the last chapter weeks later, I didn't feel sadness or regret, just gratitude. Because I realized that every ending in my life had quietly been leading me right here to peace, to purpose, to me. On Thanksgiving morning, the bakery was closed. I stood outside with a mug of coffee, watching the sunrise paint the sky in gold and pink. Jack walked up with 2 pies in hand, 1 pumpkin, 1 pecan. "Thought we could share," he said. I smiled. "You really don't take a day off from being thoughtful, do you?" He laughed. "Not when it comes to you." We sat on the bench outside, wrapped in sweaters, the world hushed around us. The air smelled of autumn leaves and cinnamon, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the ache of what I'd lost. I felt the fullness of what I had, a life rebuilt from ashes, simple but true. Jack handed me a fork. "So," he said with a grin, "pumpkin or pecan?" I looked at him, the morning sun catching the silver in his hair, and smiled. "Why choose? I'll take both." We laughed, clinking our forks like glasses, and as I took that first bite, I realized something that made me smile even wider. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. Winter crept into Texas with an unexpected gentleness that year. The mornings were misty, the afternoons crisp and golden. Each dawn, I'd open the bakery just as the world began to wake, the smell of cinnamon rolls drifting out onto the quiet street, the glow of warm light spilling through the windows. Life had become steady, simple, and full. Not loud, not grand, just right. Sometimes I caught myself thinking about the woman I used to be, the one who kept everything bottled up, who smiled through hurt, who believed her worth depended on someone else's love. I hardly recognized her anymore. The bakery had grown into something bigger than a business. It had become a gathering place not just for coffee and pie, but for stories. Women would come in after long days, sit by the window with a slice of peach cobbler, and talk about life. Some cried, some laughed, some just sat quietly, knowing they were in good company. I started a small group on Thursday evenings. We called it Coffee and Courage. It wasn't formal, just a few women, a few cups of tea, and an open heart. One evening, after closing, I looked around the bakery as the group lingered. The chatter was soft, the air smelled of sugar and coffee, and every face was glowing in the amber light. There was Ruth, who had finally gone back to school at 60. There was Margaret, who'd left a bad marriage and now ran her own antique shop. And there was young Carla, only 27, learning to stand on her own after her fiancé walked out. Listening to them, I realized that what we were doing here wasn't small. We were rebuilding piece by piece, together. When the last woman left that night, I sat alone with my cup of tea and let the quiet settle in. The clock ticked softly. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. And for a moment, I thought about how the past year had unfolded, how pain had been the thing that cracked me open, and how, through that opening, life had poured in. A few days later, Jack came by as I was locking up. He looked at me with that calm, steady warmth I'd come to know so well. "You're working too hard again," he said. I smiled. "Can't help it. These pies don't bake themselves." He handed me a small box. "Open it." Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a tiny charm shaped like a rolling pin. "For the woman who turned flour and heartbreak into gold," he said. I laughed softly, touched beyond words. "Jack, it's beautiful." "It's you," he said simply. That night, we went for a walk through the downtown square. Christmas lights twinkled on the trees, and the air was filled with the faint sound of a choir singing Silent Night. Couples held hands, children ran past with hot cocoa, and I felt the kind of peace that comes only when you've made it through the fire and finally learned to rest. We stopped at a bench near the fountain. Jack looked out at the lights and said, "Do you ever think about how different your life is now?" I nodded. "Every day. I used to think the end of my marriage was the end of me, but it wasn't. It was just the end of who I was pretending to be." He smiled softly. "And now?" "Now," I said, "I finally know who I am, and she's not bad company." He chuckled. "I agree." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The night was quiet except for the soft splash of the fountain and the carolers' voices drifting from the square. Jack reached over and took my hand. Not out of passion, but out of understanding two people who had found peace where once there was only pain. The next morning, I recorded a video for my YouTube channel, something I hadn't done since before everything fell apart. The camera was simple, just me sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee steaming beside me. "Good morning, everyone," I began, smiling. "It's been a while since I've sat down to talk with you like this. So much has changed in my life, and maybe in yours too." I paused, looking into the lens as though it were an old friend. "Last year, I thought my story was over. I thought I'd lost everything: love, trust, even myself. But life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? It doesn't end when someone walks away. Sometimes, that's when it truly begins." I took a deep breath, the smell of coffee wrapping around me like comfort. I want to say this to any woman watching who feels broken or forgotten. You are not done. You are not too old, too late, or too lost. You are just in the middle of your becoming. And I promise one day, you'll wake up, take a deep breath, and realize you feel light again. That's when you'll know you made it. I smiled, soft and steady. And maybe, like me, you'll start baking your way back to joy. I laughed lightly at myself, wiping a tear before it could fall. When I uploaded that video, I didn't expect much. But within days, thousands of women had watched it, left comments, shared their own stories. The messages came pouring in. "You gave me hope. I'm leaving today. Thank you for reminding me I'm still me." Reading them, I cried not out of sadness, but gratitude. Because somehow, through the cracks of my own broken life, a little bit of light had reached others. Weeks later, as the new year rolled in, I stood outside Evelyn's watching fireworks bloom above the town. The smell of sugar and smoke mixed in the cold air. Jack stood beside me, his hand warm in mine. When the final firework faded, I whispered, "You know, Jack, I used to think love was supposed to feel like fireworks." He smiled. "And now?" "Now," I said, "I think love feels like this quiet, safe, and steady." He nodded, squeezing my hand gently. "Then I'd say you finally got it right." I looked up at the sky one last time that night, watching the smoke drift away, and I smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because I was. Perfectly enough. Perfectly me. 3 years passed. Seasons came and went like pages turning in a book I no longer feared to read. Evelyn's Bakery had become something of a local legend. People didn't just come for pie anymore, they came for the feeling, the laughter, the music playing softly in the background, the warmth that wrapped around you the second you stepped through the door. I'd often see women sitting at the corner table where I once sat alone, heads bowed together, whispering, crying, laughing. They reminded me of myself, of who I'd been, of how far I'd come. Sometimes I'd bring them an extra cookie on the house, just because. When they'd ask why, I'd smile and say, for courage. You'll need a little sweetness on your way to healing. One morning, a young woman came in carrying a baby on her hip. She looked exhausted, eyes red from crying, hair undone in that way grief always seems to cause. She ordered a cup of coffee and sat near the window, bouncing the baby gently. After a while, she caught me looking and smiled weakly. You probably think I look like a mess. I walked over and sat across from her. Honey, you look like a woman doing her best. That's never a mess. Her eyes filled with tears. My husband left last week, said he wasn't ready to be a father. I reached across the table and took her free hand. Mine left too, not for the same reasons, but the hurt was just as deep. And if someone had told me then that I'd one day sit here, whole and happy, I wouldn't have believed them. But here I am. She wiped her eyes. How did you do it? One day at a time, I said. And with a lot of coffee and pie. She laughed through her tears. When she left, she hugged me. Thank you, she whispered. After she was gone, I stood by the window, watching her walk down the street, her baby tucked close against her chest. That familiar ache rose in me again, not pain anymore, just empathy. I whispered softly, "You'll make it, sweetheart. You will." That night, after closing, I found myself alone in the bakery. The lights were dim, the smell of vanilla still lingering in the air. I sat down at the same table I'd once cried over, took out my old journal, and began to write. Dear young ami, you were right to love deeply, even when it broke you. You were right to hope, even when it hurt. But most of all, you were right to keep going. You thought you'd lost everything, but all you lost were the things that weren't meant to stay. You built something beautiful out of the ashes, didn't you? You found peace in your own company, and love in unexpected places. You turned pain into purpose, and you gave hope to others just by surviving out loud. So, if you ever find yourself looking back, remember this. You didn't fail. You simply grew beyond what could hold you. I closed the journal, tears warm against my cheeks. They weren't sad tears, they were grateful ones. A few weeks later, on a bright Sunday morning, the town hosted a local business fair. I was invited to give a short talk about starting over. I almost said no, but something inside me, that old, brave part, said yes. When I stepped up to the microphone, I looked out at the crowd. Women of every age, some with husbands beside them, others standing alone, all of them listening. I took a deep breath. I'm not here to tell you life is easy, I began. It isn't. Sometimes it'll take everything you have and leave you wondering who you are. But what I've learned is this: endings aren't punishments, they're invitations to begin again. The audience was quiet, completely still. I used to think I was too old to start over, I continued. But I was wrong. You're never too old to heal, to dream, to fall in love with life again. Whether you're 30 or 70, it's never too late to choose yourself. There was a pause. Then, soft applause, then louder, then standing. I smiled, humbled, tears catching in the corners of my eyes. Afterward, as I was packing up my things, an elderly woman approached me, white hair, cane in hand, eyes bright with something fierce and young. She said, "You made me remember who I was before I became everyone else's caretaker. Thank you, dear." I took her hand. It's never too late to be her again. When I returned to the bakery that afternoon, Jack was already there, wiping flour off his hands. "I saw the live stream," he said, grinning. "You made half the town cry." I laughed. "Well, it's about time someone else did." He kissed my forehead. "You should be proud, Evelyn. You didn't just survive, you built something that makes other people believe they can too." I looked around the bakery, the photographs on the walls, the laughter from the back kitchen, the smell of fresh bread, and I realized he was right. Later that evening, after Jack had gone home, I sat outside on the bench with a slice of pie and watched the sunset fade into lavender and rose. The bakery lights glowed behind me, a beacon on the quiet street. I thought of Charles once, briefly, not with anger, not even with sadness, just a faint, distant compassion. Some ghosts don't need to be chased away. They simply fade when you stop feeding them. The sky darkened, the first stars appearing. I felt the cool breeze brush against my skin and smiled. The woman I used to be would have feared being alone. The woman I'd become had learned that solitude can be its own kind of grace. I took a deep breath, the air sweet with the scent of sugar and autumn. And as I sat there beneath the soft glow of my bakery sign Evelyn's, I realized that the story I'd been telling all along wasn't about heartbreak, betrayal, or even forgiveness. It was about rebirth, about a woman who finally stopped waiting for someone to save her and learned she'd been her own hero all along. I raised my cup of coffee toward the stars, whispering, "To the woman I became, and to every woman still becoming." And for the first time in a long, full life, I felt whole. 10 years later, the world had changed again. San Antonio had grown busier, louder, brighter new cafes, new faces, new stories filling the streets. But Evelyn's Bakery remained exactly what it had always been. A soft light at the corner of Maple and Fifth, where people came not just to eat, but to feel something real. I was 72 now, my hair completely silver, my steps slower, but my heart lighter than ever. Some mornings, I'd still arrive before sunrise, unlocking the door with the same quiet joy I'd felt the day I first put my name on the sign. The smell of coffee beans grinding, the hiss of the oven, they were my kind of music. Jack still came by, though these days he used a cane and grumbled about his knees more often than not. We'd joke that we were growing old like a pair of stubborn oak trees rooted and still standing, weathering every season together. He'd sit by the window sketching while I arranged pastries in the display case. Sometimes he'd draw me not how I looked, but how he said I felt. "You've still got light in your eyes, Evelyn," he'd say, handing me another sketch. "It's softer now, but stronger too." I'd laugh. "That's called wrinkles, Jack." "No," he'd grin. "That's wisdom with good lighting." Our love had never been loud or dramatic. It was quiet, consistent, steady, the kind of love that asks for nothing but presence. We didn't need promises. Just mornings together, shared silence, and a knowing glance across a crowded room. Every Thursday evening, coffee and courage still gathered. Some of the original women were gone, moved away, remarried, or passed on, but new faces filled their seats. Women in their 30s, 40s, 60s, each with her own story, her own reason for walking through my door. That night, a young woman named Sarah joined us. She was trembling when she spoke, voice soft as a prayer. "My husband's been seeing someone else," she whispered. "I found out last week. I don't even know who I am anymore." The table went quiet. Then Ruth, now 78 and fiercer than ever, reached across and took Sarah's hand. "You're someone who's about to find herself, honey. That's who." I smiled, feeling that familiar warmth in my chest. It never failed, no matter how many times I heard the story. It always began with heartbreak and ended with rebirth. When everyone had left, Sarah lingered by the door. "Mrs. Roberts," she said softly, "how do you stop hurting?" I looked at her for a long moment before answering. "You don't," I said gently. "Not all at once, but you'll wake up one day, make your coffee, tie your hair back, and realize you're not thinking about him anymore. That's how it ends, quietly, kindly." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Thank you." After she left, I stood for a while under the glow of the bakery lights. The chairs were stacked, the counters wiped clean, the air still warm with sugar and hope. And I thought maybe this is what heaven looks like. Not golden gates, not clouds, but a small bakery at dusk where laughter lingers long after everyone's gone. As the years went on, Evelyn's became a place of legacy. Mothers brought daughters, daughters brought granddaughters. The recipes and the lessons passed down like heirlooms. When my hands grew too shaky to knead dough, I trained a young woman named Lily to take over. She was bright, curious, full of that same restless energy I'd once had. On her last day of training, she looked at me and said, "Miss Evelyn, are you sure you're ready to let go?" I smiled. "I'm not letting go, sweetheart. I'm just passing it forward." The day I handed her the keys, I walked outside and looked up at the sign one last time. The letters had faded a little, the paint chipped in places, but it was still beautiful, still mine. A few months later, Jack and I moved to a small house by the sea, the same coast we'd visited all those years ago. The sound of waves became our daily companion. I'd sit on the porch with my coffee, watching gulls glide above the water, the air salty and alive. Sometimes, I'd think of Daniel, now remarried, with 2 children who called me Grandma Evie. They visited every summer, filling the house with laughter and sand and the smell of sunscreen. Life had come full circle. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the horizon gold, Jack dozed off beside me, his hand still holding mine. I watched the light flicker across his face and whispered, "We did it, didn't we? We made it to peace." He stirred, smiling in his sleep. We sure did." I closed my eyes, listening to the sound of the ocean. For a moment, I thought about the girl I used to be frightened, lost, waiting for someone else to rescue her. I wanted to reach back through time and tell her, "You'll be okay. You'll lose things you think you can't live without, but you'll find yourself instead, and she'll be worth it." The next morning, I opened my eyes to sunlight streaming through the curtains and the smell of sea air. Jack was still sleeping beside me, peaceful. I stood, stretched, and walked outside. The world was quiet, just the sound of waves kissing the shore and the gulls calling overhead. I stood there barefoot in the sand, coffee in hand, and smiled at the horizon. Every scar, every heartbreak, every lesson had led me here. A full life, a quiet love, a heart still open. I took a deep breath and whispered into the wind, "Thank you." And the sea answered softly, carrying my words away like a prayer. If my story touched your heart today, don't leave without subscribing. There are so many women out there, strong, kind, and brave, who've lived through heartbreak and found their way back to peace. Every week, I share another true-to-life story that reminds us we're never too old to start again, to laugh again, to love again. So hit subscribe, tap that bell icon, and join our community of women who believe that every ending can still be a new beginning. And if you'd like to support these stories, click thanks below. It helps me keep baking more stories of courage, hope, and second chances. Thank you, my dear friends, and until next time, take care of your heart and keep your light shining.